Alright, folks. Welcome back, everyone. 皆さん、おかえりなさい。今日は197日目です。It is day 197. We have some grammar reviews today, so let's get to the grammar reviews first before we hop back into our topics. Okay. 日はとても、worrisome or super kind? Oh, 優しい人よ。彼に世話。ね世話、世話になった人もいるし。That's she for the reasons, but conjunctive. Right? 助けられた人も quite a few. Okay, so that's a person's name, right? Very nice person or kind person. The people receive, receiving. Wait, other offers. One is kind of tough. Not the. Wow. Favors? And then. Wait. So this is the and. Help. I guess. That's interesting. I'm not sure how to interpret this. This does say there are quite a few people that receive favors from him. So this is from, right? This is him. Who is receiving the favor? Oh. Wait. Oh, that's interesting. Oh, that's... Okay. Receiving... Huh. This order is tough to understand. Haven't done your polls yet, but you also don't know and don't have resources because you've been spending them on your current team. Oh, yeah. Okay, so this will help quite a few people. Quite a few. So that means it's negative. It's not... How to do this? Like, quite a few, so it's not little, right? How to do quite a few? It's like... 少なくない。
ヒッキーはとても優しい人よ。彼に世話になった人もいるし、助けられた人も少なくない。
Nice. Okay, hang on. Can I click on these? Oh, I can. Alright, here we go. So this is the ninaru, right? To become... Right, so I got that and passed. So they interpret it as received favors. Maybe to become helped. Yeah, to become... Or this is favor. This is like caring. To become caring. So to be taken care of as receive favors. That's so interesting. So like... And then this whole thing is being used to modify hito. So people who have received favors from him, ni being the target where the favor is being received. That is interesting. And then obviously mo, double mo for also, and then irushi. Iru receive and then are being received, and then she, or is irushi something? No, can't click on that. Be like that, but gotta collect them all, you know? Fair enough. You were on P5X for 6 hours today, just going through story to the event. That's fair enough. We'll get there in time. このビルは出口が、no, what is that middle thing? What in the world? Oh, it's a place. So, none something show. Show. Can I click on this? I don't think I've ever seen cop before. Like that. Sure. Interesting. What is the character? Counter for article. N1. Interesting. Is this written in kana? No. Interesting. Okay. It's a place, so regardless, it's a place. Many. Interesting. Many aru node, so many are this node so emphasizing here とても安全です. As many as. So is that considered a counter then? As many as. Like up to? Like no more than? Like しかない. Emphatic. Maybe like at least? Like what? This would mean at least. We are looking for a grammar point attached to a number and counter. Yeah, I know. That does attach to a counter. Don't even at me right now, but it's more emphasized that the amount is surprising. Four of. Oh.
このビルは出口が何箇所もあるので、とても安全です。
友達とのは、殿は、彼女は、approximately, like, I mean, no, approximately. Not a counter. 28ぐらいかな。Roughly. For the most part. Maybe like, okay?
友達との話。彼女はだいたい28歳くらいかな。
Alright. この3つ No. この4つ Right. この4つ among or within, like, の中で3つも嫌いなの right? And then the other one was what? 嫌 right? I remember
この4つの中で3つも嫌いなの
3つも嫌いなの明日ね 昨日、明日、明日から、だから旅行に行くから、風を、please don't. So like, がなくて、がないで、ない
明日
でね。
から旅行に行くから風邪をひかないでね。
Uh, 目目に目にゴミ Oh, interesting. Dust. ゴミがいって、or 入って、何にも、Okay. 何にも、cannot see. So, it's their eyes, and it's talking about their ability. So, do we use... 見られないよ? No, it still uses 見らない. Oh, 見えら... Oh no. It says potential. Use a different... I cannot see. Different structure? Maybe 見られ... Am I using like ite or something? No, no progressive. I really thought it was just 見られる. So then it's just... What the... How do I negative... Right? Hmm. So we're not talking about causative. Passive. E. Maybe like... やらない? That's just not being visible though. And then I thought maybe we take the potential, or maybe convert it into... If I convert it into a potential, it would be what I typed first. Different grammar structure. Hmm. Maybe like... No, I can't add a particle. I don't really know what they're looking for. They really wanted 見え
目
ない
にゴミが入って何も見えないよ。
I don't understand anymore. Yeah, I don't really understand anymore. So it is still 見える Huh. I mean, that is the potential form of 見る I genuinely do not know when to use, oh yeah, 見られる Like, when in a... Because this says, 見える means something is visible. And then... Oh, well, you know... Does this identify what is visible? Anything. I guess anything is the visibility, I suppose. And then I used 見られない, right? Yeah. What was the first one? Because we gotta pay attention to how this is phrased here. Okay. What is that? 生まれてから ever. Ongoing. ずっとこの村に住んでいます。
生まれてからずっとこの村に住んでいます。
寝る前にwhat? ブラックコーヒーを because I drank? Oh, using the verb as a conjunctive. 寝らないんだ。なんで
寝る前にブラックコーヒーを飲んで寝られないんだ。
Ganga exist? Oh, wait. A light, 丁寧 Ganga is ので what is that last thing? Go yukuri. Is that an honorific with yukuri? Please take your time. Or please take your time. Can I click on this? Oh no, I can't. Oh no. That's a mimetic phrase. Yukuri. Slowly, unhurried. Oh. Okay. Yep. Mimetic it is. Ganga あります? Wait, is time different? A very polite. I don't understand how this can be. This must be a special, like a special thing. So it's probably not just aru and iru, right? Like it would do like arimasu. How about a grammar point that's a bit more polite? Bit more polite than arimasu. でございます. Oops, just not. で just ございます.
時間がございますので、ごゆっくり。
ございますのでごゆっくり。ゲームを楽しんでいたのにやめる was forced to stop. Passive, positive, passive. やめられたれあI started. This is gonna be bad. Okay. Let's think about this for a moment. So, right. It's a ichidan. So I would use sasera. Oh yeah. So yame saserare rareta.
ゲームを楽しんでいたのにやめさせられた。
やめさせられた。I can't do the double sa and the double like rare is strong harder than sase. So やめさせられた。100円のthank you for lend. So thankful plus lend. また後で pay back. 返すね。Thank you. So like she, or is it just she, or no, 貸してくれてありがと
う。100円を貸してくれてありがとう。また後で返すね。
Oh, hey, we did the 11. All right, back to the most enjoyable week I've had so far. Topics time. Except yesterday, we kind of went into a digression about video games and whatnot and talked about motivation and stuff. Let's try to read through lesson 2. I don't think I'm going to get through the topics in time. We'll hit it fairly hard tomorrow, I suppose. Let's see. Getting into action. Be able to talk about actions and doing things, right? So now we learn about ichidan, godan, verbs, and the direct object marker. Very quaint. In this topic, we're going to get our first look at Japanese verbs and learn about 2 main types, do verbs and u verbs. Knowing the difference is important as it affects how they conjugate, change so other words can attach to them. We'll also learn how to use the object marker particle wo with verbs. It will tell us what is being acted upon in a sentence, right? テレビを見る。
テレビを見る。お茶を飲む。
Okay. Fairly standard. Right, we're good on that. We know how to do verbs and object markers. Up until now, we haven't really discussed the order that works, that words flow in a Japanese sentence. Now that we have a bit more about verbs and the most essential particles, let's take a closer look, right? Who and what. As a general rule, the subject will come before the object, right? As in not the subject of the sentence, but the subject. Wait. No, that's fine. That is the subject. So they're talking about the subject, as in the pedantic, the more colloquial use of the word subject, not the subject of the action, which is the object. Because it'll be pretty clear later. So the subject will come before the object and the verb always comes last, right? So subject, object, verb, as opposed to subject, verb, object. Although this is the most neutral order, Japanese is actually quite flexible, so is English. So the idea is that analogously, when you understand the nuance and the context and the contextual nature of a language, oftentimes they are far more flexible than that, right? There's exceptions to the rule and rules to the exception, depending on your perspective on how you first learned it. The reason why I say, wait, what do you mean there are rules to the exception versus exception to the rules? Well, most rules and exceptions part from the perspective of the person. If the first thing you learn is an exception, then you can still learn a rule, not an exception. So like on the internet, for example, people can learn something that is rarer occurring than it is the majority. That's where often I would say the phrase, I have to remind people that online, sometimes you're looking at the exception, not the rule. Like, for example, being exposed to content creators. They are the exception, not the rule. It is the rule that there are a lot of people who make content, but the people you're watching are the exception to the rule because of the way internet arranges information. So when you're thinking about like studying, if you have a, I don't know, if you have a growing tumor in your stomach, there's a really great chance that you're reading about the exception, not the rule. Because you can convince yourself that you have cancer and you can rule out all of the potentially higher probabilistic things. So that's kind of what I mean. And saying that Japanese is actually flexible, that is in contrast to the idea that Japanese is rigid, not the idea that the comment that I make. Those are two separate comments, that English is also flexible. And what I'm trying to draw is a parallelism. When you understand a language sufficiently, oftentimes your brain can do the interpretation. Like, for example, when you're a native speaker, for example, and you are used to working in a business where foreigners will speak your language, you are more likely inclined to understand what they're trying to say, despite them not saying it in a very specific way. So quite flexible. Of course, they're talking about grammatical things. As long as the verb stays at the end, we can swap the other parts around to shift emphasis, right? And interesting enough, English, although not grammatically maybe acceptable, you can shuffle it around all you want. Largely because you kind of hear, well, at least I have heard examples of shuffling of subject, verb, and object. We were talking about Yoda yesterday. Shuffling of object, subject, and stuff due to the propensity of people who speak English who may not be Americans, I suppose, or something like that. My parents would say verbs and subjects in different orders, for example, when they're using English, and you understand the relationship between them. Anyways, did they give us an example? And then this is what I mean by they mean the subject of the sentence in the grammatical sense, and the object in the grammatical sense when it comes to the colloquial use. Now the thing is, it's not to be compared with this I would consider as the subject marked by the subject marker, right? So notice how there's a direct object marker. So that can be a little confusing because sometimes there can be a subject marker after an object marker, right? And that's what they were talking about. The subject, as a general rule, the subject will come before the object, and they're demonstrating that, well, sometimes the object comes before the subject. And then understand the nice thing about understanding what an object marker and a subject marker is, then the particles, usually it how I would think about it anyways from my standpoint, imoto ga. So imoto ga, I tend to listen for the ups and downs of additional particles attached to a phrase or a thing. So when someone is speaking in like plain, where they're really simplifying things, easy listening, they end on particles very often, and the particles can give you a very repetitious clue to what part of the sentence or what thing it is, which is what I really enjoy about what I like about kind of the pedanticness, honestly, of Japanese. And pedanticness usually seems like a negative thing, but in this case, for me, it's a positive thing. This is kind of like where while English is very explicit, Japanese is very explicit about their part of speech, or like their part of their sentence. So they have a particle system, English does not. Where English is excessively descriptive, Japanese is not. It's more contextual. And then Chinese dispenses with both. So relatively speaking, this is fairly refreshing. So when I'm listening to Japanese, I kind of code swap a lot. Where when I'm listening to anime, I'm listening for vocabulary or like whole things. However, when I'm easy listening, like when you're listening to podcasts, who is an easy listener, speaker, the natural places that they lump together are the particles. So like imoto ga ramen wo tsukuru. So it's, in my opinion, it's a great way to bridge smoothing in, because then you can imagine where the parts of a sentence are. At least that's how I went about it, until you get smoother and then connecting blocks together is, in my opinion, a smoother transition.
妹がラーメンを作る。
Yeah, so 妹がラーメンを作る。
妹がラーメンを作る。
Right.
ラーメンを妹が作る。
ラーメンを妹が作る。Right. So this is grammatically possible, but this is grammatically possible, and it depends. It changes the emphasis basically, at least, or the emphasis is accented because it's at least in my opinion, this makes it so that if this is the neutral is the general rule. So you deliberately switch it up to put something in front. I think that's what I feel is emphasizing the ramen. Like you and I. Actually, is that a good example? That's not really a good example. I have to think about an English example. Anyways, framing the conversation. Another general rule is that wa will tend to come at the very beginning, right? When it is used. This is because it tells us the topic of the conversation, right? Framing the rest of what is to come. Sometimes it can be hard to conceptualize a whole statement unless we first know within what context it is beginning, which is very inherent of Chinese. Chinese, all the conditions come before, because there are no particles or conjugations that will tell you what the context, what the conceptualization or the condition of the conceptualization of the following phrases. We can take the object of a sentence, normally marked with wo, and rephrase it as the topic by using wa. This makes it feel like the main thing we want to talk about. Let's look at all the possible patterns with wa, ga, wo in one simple sentence. I used to do this on my own. So like when I since a Duolingo, for example, they give you most things as quickly as possible in the form of repetitious sentences, and you repeat those repetitious sentences verbatim, like rapidly over and over again. So the idea is every time a sentence is presented in a specific structure, I typically think about how I could reword the emphasis. So this was a kind of my own, I did this in the background as I'm thinking about the words. So it's great to see it here where they show you how you can rephrase, which typically then creates a different nuance of emphasis for each type. So like are you emphasizing that the topic is you or the food, right? In this case, they're doing you or the food. And then are you emphasizing the eating of the food or you eating, right? And I'm already doing this in English, but the English, there aren't any particles. So sometimes you could add adverbs or reorder the words in English to emphasize which one is more important. And typically, these are not even general rules in English because it really does depend on where you came from. Sometimes the most important thing comes first in English. Sometimes the most important thing comes last in English, depending on the origin of the person's culture. For myself, typically I would say if it's the subject or the topic, placing the subject topic that comes first, like first in order, would be more important than the thing that comes last. However, because of English's prosodic stress, the prosodically stressed thing is the emphasis of the importance. And honestly, it's kind of curious if Japanese does that or not. Like, what I mean is use prosodic stress for de-accenting and accenting. That's something that I don't hear too much, at least from my ears in Japanese, because they have a particle system. So, let's see. So,
私は寿司を食べる。
so this is your standard order, right? 私は I, the subject, am eating the sushi, right? 寿司を食べる. And you have to start somewhere. So this is the neutral one.
私が寿司を食べる。
So now you're emphasizing the subject, which is you. Right? Answering the implicit question of who is eating, right? So ga marks the subject. So the focus is on the subject. So 私がsushiを食べる. Right? And then now
寿司は私が食べる。
食べる. So now the sushi is the topic. It is inferred or implied that you are eating when you say 食べる. So you don't really have to say it, but I do not know about other foods, but as for sushi, I will eat, right? Yeah. Wa tells us about talking about sushi, but not the other foods. Exactly. So no other foods are being eaten, and it's inferred that you are eating it. So technically, this is not there. We can see from that although wa and ga are often compared, wa can be used much more generally than ga can, right? For myself, when speaking in English, you typically use prosodic stress. So like, I will eat the sushi. I'll eat the sushi. I will eat the sushi. And to me, that's kind of a way to imply the feeling of what wa and ga is like. The emphasis is often on the information that someone wants to portray. So like the focus of it would be the prosodic stress in English. So I like blue things. I also like red things. Not I like red things and I like blue things. The things is already established. So it doesn't matter. It doesn't feel right. Like, why are you emphasizing things twice? It's like, that's kind of one of the things about English. So hear me out though. I don't think this is a normal thing anymore online. So it'll be interesting in the future to see if de-accenting using prosodic stress is going to be a thing anymore. Largely because everyone speaks with like upspeak, and their emphasis in prosodic stress is particularly very robotic. Maybe in English there will be the development of a particle system. Who knows? Like, they would add, maybe someone will deliberately add something at the end to indicate which ones they're focusing on. That'll be it. In the future, English just develops this like habitual additive end phrase. Like, for example, looks maxing, right? You could kind of say maxing. Maxing could, the mechanical addition of something to the end of a word causes it to be emphasized. That's mechanically possible because in English on NetSpeak, that's already happening, attaching things to the end of verse, like adding a suffix, or more or less like a suffix. I don't know what it's called, but just adding a suffix to something. Now, there can be, in the future, English could develop something where there's a pattern of people adding a generalized suffix to the end of any particular word to emphasize it, maybe a noun or an adjective. So like, I don't know what it could be, but maybe like is, like I I is sushi, like eating sushi, right? I is eating sushi. It could be replaced with anyone's, like I am, and then it's just am everywhere. Like anytime am is placed to the next of the noun or the syllable, like the object or the subject, it is inferring that is the syllable. So then no one has to emphasize it anymore. You could just say, I am sushi is being eaten, right? Just so am would just mark it, so you wouldn't need to stress it anymore, right? That could be a thing. I think because of the way Japanese is with the particle system, there's less prosodic stress, so you don't have to like stress watashi, right? Watashi wa sushi o taberu. Watashi wa sushi o taberu, right? Or watashi ga sushi o taberu. No need for like stressing the particular part of the sentence, largely because the ga, I feel like it's often redundant per se, redundant with the ga and the wo. And a little deep cut, I think one of the things that draws people, their ears to Japanese, like the ones that self-select themselves, like, oh, I really like the way Japanese sounds, I think it's because there's a lack of prosodic stress, like a de-emphasizing. There's less de-accenting in Japanese, so everything sounds really smooth, consistent. And then occasionally you get the really animated emotional prosodic stress, like nani, right? Like nani, that type of thing. So sure, maybe that's how I feel like that there's a coincidence or a correlation between those who, when they speak in English, it's incredibly lacking prosodic stress, and those coincidentally right now correlates with they probably like Japanese. Meanwhile, when I think about like Chinese, that's not the case. Like Chinese is all over the place. In fact, sometimes I don't even know what's considered prosodic stress in Chinese, then it's simply being Chinese, being a tonal language, right? So that's something to keep in mind. I think English is getting closer and closer to Japanese when it comes to the lack of de-accenting. So when someone talks, it always sounds like, I will eat sushi. I am the one who eat the sushi. I do not know about other foods, but as for sushi, I will eat it. I will eat sushi. I am the one who will eat the sushi. I do not know about other foods, but as for sushi, I will eat it. So I chose what to emphasize in the sentence due to stress accent, or it overlaps with prosodic stress. So in order to make yourself sound less monotone, you don't necessarily have to raise your volume. You could also pause and extend because of stress accent, right? So I do not know about other foods, but as for sushi, I will eat it. As opposed to, I do not know about foods, but as for sushi, I will eat it. Like, there is a difference between them. So your neutral is to read it as flat as possible, which is kind of the whole Japanese thing. Like, read Japanese as flat as possible so that you gain a neutral appreciation for everything. So, 私は寿司を食べる. I will eat sushi. Or you can start sounding like an American trying to speak, or like an American English, or like an English speaker trying to speak Japanese, and you're like, 私はsushiを食べる. That's what happens when you start adding the standard like prosodicness of English, or at least my opinion, the prosodicness of English when you're speaking. So when I read people's texts, like, I don't read it like I'll use Coffer's thing, like just going through the story before I do the events. Just going through the story before I do the events. Just going through the story before I do the events. So I'm implying like pauses and stresses and whatnot based on what I think he's saying. Right? So, don't know. Maybe Japanese has these nuances and I can't appreciate them yet. So a grain of salt. Last but not least, as we briefly mentioned before, the verb will come last in Japanese sentences. We are given all the other context first, time, place, subject, object, and then finally told what happens at the very end. Is that true for... Nope. Chinese is a mixed bag. In general, things that come early in a sentence will be given information or details about things that come later, with the most important thing coming at the end, right? And this is where I would contrast oftentimes, or like there are enough times where the most important things come first in English. Again, still varies with the culture that is using the English. However, there is significant enough that it is not a general rule that the most important thing comes at the end, the most important thing comes first. Yeah.
明日は父が冷たいビールを買う。
So, 明日は, so the topic of the sentence is tomorrow, right? And the focus of the subject that's doing is the father, 父. And then 冷たい is the adjective that modifies ビール. And then it is the 冷たいビールを that is being purchased. 買う. Right? So technically the main point in the topic of tomorrow is the father buying the beer. Okay. Let's look at this. Ooh, is this a date? Date this? ね?
拓也、僕はラーメンを食べます。君は？さくら、ラーメンいいですね。私はバターラーメンを食べます。拓也、バターは美味しいですよね。僕もそれを食べます。さくら、お酒は飲みますか？拓也、水がいいです。さくら、今日は土曜日です。私はワインを飲みます。拓也、ワイン、バターラーメン、いいですね。
That's such a weird reasoning. But Sakura said, 今日は土曜日です。土曜日です。私はワインを読みます。It's Saturday, or or it's the weekend, right? You could say 今日は, or maybe like 週末ですね。私はワインを読みます. Like, it's the weekend. 週末, right? Uh, she's just saying it's Saturday, so I'll have wine. So we have Takuya and Sakura, right? Sakura and Sakura. So boku wa, he's saying concerning me, so I'm the topic. Like boku wa, Takuya is saying that I'm having ramen, right? Ramen. You, kimi wa, and using kimi means that they're kind of close, right? They're close peeps. And then she's like, ramen, sounds good. Ii desu ne. That sounds good, or it is good. Asking for confirmation, right? That's from our topic from before, where that is good, right? Or sounds good. And then she said for her, so watashi wa, right? Watashi wa, and boku versus watashi, there is a gender separation, or presumably a gender separation between the two when you're using it. So watashi is the neutral I, and boku is very presumably there's a slight masculine bent to it. Anyways, and then she said butter ramen. I have no idea what butter ramen is, but it sounds delicious. She's gonna have that. And they both are talking in tene, which is interesting. So despite him using kimiwa, maybe it's a more of a male to a female interaction, but then they use the tene, which is tabemasu, as opposed to taberu, right? So that's interesting. So they may or may not be close. It's just kind of tossed in the air. Or they're being polite to each other as a form of endearment. There's just so many ways to interpret the use of combining like things like kimiwa versus tabemasu. And then we have Bata, he's Takuya reinforces, because we know ne, right? Like, oh yeah, ramen butter is good, right? Like, it's the ne, yone, so like, right? Like, for sure, or like looking even stronger emphasis that it is very good, right? And then boku means me also, right? Me also, that I will have that. Or sore, we went over sore, which is the nominal demonstrative. So I'll eat that too, right? I'll eat that. And then Sakura asks, are you gonna drink anything? And really drink alcohol? Are you gonna drink alcohol? They're gonna say, well, you drink alcohol, but it would mean, are you going to have a drink in English? Like, if I were to like English colloquialize it, when I read osake wo yomimasu ka, wa yomimasu ka, to me in this situation, I would interpret it as, are you going to have a drink? As opposed to, are you going to drink alcohol? Are you going to have a drink? And then obviously Takuya, being responsible, says mizu ga ii desu, as in water is fine, or water's good. And then she argues that kyou wa doyoubi desu, like today is Saturday, so watashi wa wine o yomimasu, right? I will drink wine. And then Takuya is like, oh, he's being a gentleman. It's not what that's saying, but I'm like I'm filling in the blanks of what the scene would be like. He's like, oh wait, she does drink. And then he's gonna say wine, not bata ramen, ii desu ne. So he's just saying, wine, butter ramen, that's good. The thing is, or how lovely, right? He didn't say he was going to drink wine too, which is funny. That's what made me laugh. I'm like, are you gonna join her or not? It's like, nah. I'll leave it ambiguous. I might just stick with my water. You know, he's being responsible. Think about it this way. Who's Oh, actually, if we're thinking about the Japanese setting, they're probably walking. So that's fine. But if they were driving, I'm like, yeah, like if I were to contextualize it to, I don't know, the suburbias of Americana, the guy is like, I'll drink water because he's the DD, he's the designated driver. That would be kind of a lovely thing. You don't have to, in my opinion, this is how I read things. I just wanted to share. But when something is, you know, some people can say, oh man, this is really boring. Like, dang, studying this fundamentals is really boring. And this comes up quite often with study material and learning material and textbook material. They're very dry, right? They're objectively concise and really focused and efficient. Now here I have a deep cut about this. Lots of people that I've met love efficiency. Often when it means they can free up time to do something else. And that something else provides, gives imagination. So anytime someone's like studying something, they would study for efficiency so that they can save free time, do something else that gives them their imagination. So like, oh man, I gotta get through this lesson. I gotta get through this lesson so I can play a video game. And they are dependent that that video game be entertaining for them. No other way, right? So what this is telling me is this is a behavioral correlation that I tackle on a daily basis. It deals with the idea of consistency. It ties back to consistency. And this line of thinking actually goes against consistency. So when you're efficient, you're looking for the driest. One of the consequences of efficiency is you are looking for the driest way to do something, right? Then if it's lumped together with free time to do something else that gives imagination, that is the driest way you can experience your own hobbies. So this cycle I often tackle in a very complex way. When someone says like, oh, you know, I don't get it, things get boring very quickly, or I don't see the point in most things, because you technically spend most of your time only caring about the most efficient things, the most objective things. So when you turn your hobby into the most efficient thing, which is constantly being exposed to the driest way to do something, and you continue to reinforce your reward system based on the driest way to get that, aka like doom scrolling, like dopamine, cheap dopamine, right? This is a great Gen Z buzzword, dopamine. Generally speaking, what I'm doing now is demonstrating that it doesn't really matter. It matters a lot less whether it's dry or not, because I'm a thinking person, so I can use my imagination to make this memorable or to make this interesting to me. Now, you might not need that skill. Some people are like, why waste time using your imagination when someone can give you your imagination, or something can give you imagination? Well, when you are bored and you keep complaining about there's no point in doing things or repeating things or practicing things that you must maintain, then it is also a consequence of you saying there's no point in using your imagination or using your creative liberties, because it would not happen. So what am I talking about? I'm talking about the pyramid. This is creation. Certainly when you memorize something, right? When you memorize something, you hope that the person doesn't say, oh, now we can compare, right? Comparison analysis. Oh, now we can contextualize. And then what is the last step? You combine all those things to create. Someone who's stuck here, or someone who could possibly be here, often is efficiency prone. Not a bad thing or a good thing. It's efficiency prone because these things require high volume time. Your actions have low value but it has low value but also low time. So like the overall is that the time is probably 1-to-1. When you create something, it's usually like 10-to-1. So what I mean is, like, you spend more time doing a task, and that task involves more things versus a single task, right? And you can continue to zoom into the task. But for myself, boring things, you can choose to be reliant completely on the boring thing, or you can continuously push yourself to be more creative. Like for myself, this topic, you could sit here and spend 30 seconds saying, this is my impression of someone who is N3. They believe they're N3. Like they passed the N4 and like N5 and N4 exam, and they are telling themselves, oh yeah, oh they introduced topics, Bunpro added topics, and they're like, huh, well, it's a shame that Bunpro only cover N5 concepts. I already know all that stuff. There's no reason to ever go over it again. Like there's no reason that I would find more value or test or constructively change the context or even embellish the context as I go over it. So there's no reason to maintain those things. So what does that tell me when someone says, oh, I already passed N5, right? I'm N3, so dang, N5, N4, that's for beginners. That's for people who are bad at, or like lesser than me, and they would say something like, oh, these are too simple. And I agree with them. When you want to, if your goal is to get to N1 as fast as possible, sure, efficiency. Right, efficiency. Now, what I'm talking about here is the people that have problems, the ones that think they have problems. I don't technically see a problem until they tell me it's a problem. Like, you can grind all the way from N5 to N1 and just say you're happy. So that's not the situation I'm talking about, where someone is doing something and they're happy about it. They understand that that's what's happening. One of the things about efficiency-driven things is it's objective. Well, objective doesn't guarantee you that you'll be happy about it. Like, when you're happy about something, that's subjective. So, now, hear me out. There are wonderful people out there, and I think they're more the exception than the rule, which is the first theme I said. where when someone starts something, they believe they can be objective long enough to get to their goal. I don't meet those people. I rarely meet those people because they're successful. They can objectively do most things and continue doing them. Yesterday, I was asked, how do you start and not stop and keep going, right? And keep going. So not stop, keep going. Start and then keep going. Unfortunately, the answer is by keep going. Now, what does that look like? There's no specific answer to that. For me, I stay happy. And how do I stay happy? By being subjective and creative. I can do this for days. I can talk about all the things that I know already in a different context to practice other skills that are layered on top of my maintenance of the skill. So I can do this forever and I'll be happy. I'm content. When someone is pride on efficiency and then they suddenly get to like N3 and they're like, dude, things just seem so boring. Like, I'm not moving fast enough to make it interesting. Or the thing you don't control, is not interesting anymore. That's where I hear it most of the time. It can happen at N5, it can happen at N4, it can happen at N3. Typically, when I came across, most people start having engagement problems or motivation problems at N4. So they pass N5, they recover from the honeymoon periods of passing the N5, and then they realize they have to start all over again with that feeling. That feeling keeps starting over again. Like, oh, okay, now we're in the next block. Time to start back in the beginning again, because N5 is different. N5 is viewed as separate from N4. And when I think about language progress, you can make it, I can hear compelling arguments for the counter. I'll present one narrative. The narrative that I typically use as a motivational tool. Others can argue differently, right? There are other ways to view this. For myself, when you finish N5, N4 is N5 plus N4, not N4. So whenever someone asks me, so how do you keep going? Well, you never stopped. If you're working on N4, you never stop learning Japanese. And you never stop working and using N5. So when you come back to these things, what am I doing? Someone asked me, so are you N3? And I'm like, well, conservatively, I'm N3. I know up to N3. So that means anytime I view this stuff, I can contextualize things from N5 to N3. So that means that when I'm reading these things, I'm also thinking, you know, I could add more to this. Imagine it. And if I can't, I'll use English, because English, I'm whatever it is, you know, native English speaker, however you like. I can use English to motivate myself to say, what else can I say here? What other things can I say here, right? Well, notice that this example lacks conditionals, right? Like, you could rephrase this as, because today, right? Like, 今日から, right? Or 今日ので, or maybe like 週末ので. And then like, because it's the weekend, or for the reason that it is the weekend, I'm going to drink. That's one of the N4 concept, like grammar points that I need to know. So you can do that. Use your imagination. I had this conversation multiple times with Drama, when Drama was talking about how he was stuck between wanting to listen to N3 like podcasts and more interesting topics because the actual Japanese is more complex. He doesn't want to go back to listening to like the easy listening N5s and N4s because it's really drab, it's really dry. And my nonchalant comment was, well, just because they're not talking about it, you could think about it. So that's the kind of thing where when you're reading a book, right, are you bound by the book or are you having fourth wall thought? And not everyone likes that. Obviously it breaks people's quote unquote immersion, not the same type of immersion. We're not talking about like the method that people always keep referring to, like immersing in Japanese. We're talking about fourth wall breaking. Some people don't like that. They like watching movies and books and be taken away for an adventure. And I enjoy thinking about the impact of the book and the person writing the stories and whatnot. So I'm usually at a fourth wall. I'm typically the observer and fourth wall thing. So that might not appeal to everyone. For myself, when I'm reading this, I immerse myself in a participant in the story. So I am the observer. I immerse myself in what it could be, what it could possibly be, not immerse myself by having someone provide all the details for me. So if a product sucks, I see how to make it better for myself personally, right? Like if a game is not that great, what's literally there is not that great, I spend a lot of time talking about what I could do about that, or what I could change about that, or what I could make a comment about it. Hence the commentary, right? A bad game is not valueless to me personally. It's not to say that the game isn't bad to a lot of people. Like, there's a difference between admitting and accepting that the game is bad, or knowing the game is bad and seeing what else you can add to it or take away from it or refine it. So I'm consistently a critical thinker and a problem solver. If someone tells me a game is bad, I will try to see how it's bad from their perspective and offer a counter example or an affirmation. The idea is it requires a fourth wall break. So is this stuff basic? Well, I can appreciate that what's there is basic, right, to anyone who knows all the grammar points. So if you're a person who's reading this to confirm how much you know, it's not going to do it, right? It's not going to tell you that you know N4 or N3. If you output N4 and N3 onto an N5 only topic, then you can produce to demonstrate that you know how to go beyond this. So in that way, it can provide a lot of practice. I think that's what I was trying to illustrate here. And I don't say this each and every day. I don't sit here and say, oh, hey guys, now I'm going to use my imagination to make this more exciting for me, or man, this is so basic, I'm gonna force myself to do this. For myself, it's a habit now. Like, I do it automatically. This very digression that I'm making is for the purpose of the things that I try to demonstrate. When someone asks me, how do you stay motivated? How do you stay consistently pushing forward even when you're teaching someone something you already know? Well, teaching someone is a very different skill than knowing it yourself. And in my opinion, one of the toughest skills that I practice, if someone wants to argue about it, is to get someone else interested in their own work. Like the successful people out there would be like, what do you mean that's a tough thing? If I work, I should be interested in it, right? Well, yes, ideally speaking. However, there are far more people who are not interested in the work that they have to do, and they have to figure out how to manage to become interested or to reinforce themselves to be interested long enough to reach their goal or a point of satisfaction that they have determined. And that includes learning Japanese, where at some point they lost motivation, they lose sight of the day-to-day, fixated on their goal, and have no form of maintenance for it. And oftentimes the thing that helped them, that I was able to maybe suggest to them, is to address how their efficiency, their hyper focus on efficiency, is making everything dull and unimportant to them, and constantly about some dry progression. So it's kind of like if you're going on a trip, right? And you need to get from point A to point B. If you're goal oriented, you could say, oh, let's just get from point A to point B, right? So that means that your discipline, right, and your objectivity is sufficient to surpass whatever this T is, this delta T or D, right? Distance or time, how long it takes to get there. And this goal has to be sufficient in reward to equate to the time and distance spent. That is objectivity. This is technically subjective after the fact. So the task is objectively viewed, the reward is subjectively felt at the end. Now, for me, I wouldn't take one or the other exclusively. I would combine the two. So, like, you could have someone who do this and end up here. What I am suggesting is doing something like this. It's a mix of the two. So you add scenic things along the way, right? Your imagination to get to point B. You're not going extreme and just letting yourself go out of control and never getting to point B, right? You can if you want. Sometimes I do this C path, because then it ends up that C ends up being greater than B. That can happen for sure if you're a creative type, right? C for creative. A B for business, by the way. So if you're only business, you go straight line. And if you can keep doing that for the rest of your life, that's awesome. The problem I see most of the time is that what happens is this is boring and uneventful and also too long. So they would travel, and it's like, oh man, there's nothing to do along the way. They just stop here. And then what they would do then is to then try to travel to point C. From here on out, they would detour, just stop cold turkey, and try to get to C. They go, and then same problem repeats. So they never get to goal C. So now this is a fail. And then C is a fail. Because now they're going to go to D. And D is constantly out of reach. Right? The next goal is constantly out of reach. This is the vicious pattern that I typically see. So it never feels like they ever win. They never accomplish their goals ever consistently. So anytime they start, they already have a fear of failing. So, like, I have all these plans, you know, like I have all these plans. Plans is you can see the goal, you can see the goal, you can see the goal. And like, are you doing them? Like, do them, start them, go. And then they would say, well, the bottleneck is that I'm objective. Like, I've already planned it. The bottleneck is that I planned it. Like, well, if you planned it, are you going to do it? And then the fear keeps coming back. It's like, well, I have lots of plans, but I don't want to start them because I fear that it's not going to be good enough. I'm like, yeah, because you planned it out like it has to be done in that specific way, and it's dry as all get out, right? So now it's not to me, the solution that I typically use, you have to imagine actual examples, like specifics between the person and I. But generally speaking, it would be a mix. How do you keep perpetually going? Well, there are things like you're trying to get here. Maybe you do like, you get to here and you fork. Right? Then you can choose, you get to here, and you can fork. And the thing is, you're still going net this direction. Now you have choices. And with more redundancy, you have less, you can feel like you have less opportunities of failing yourself. And each of these forks are goals. And that's where the whole people say, like, make smaller goals on the way to a longer goal, right? Because once you pass this point, you have succeeded somehow. Like, you have some level of success. You have achieved something. So this is where, like, Bunpro comes in with SRS, or like Anki with FSRS and whatnot. There are specific milestones. You could even call these as badges, right? Badges, and then like badges that are tiered. So this could be like a tier legendary badge, and these are tier gold badges, and then this is like a tier S badge. So that's how the progression system, like gamification, helps string along motivation. So to tie this to yesterday's comment, me and Procall were kind of intensely in a discussion about Power World, right? Power World and Subnautica. And I was talking about how Power World and Subnautica creates or designs, at least in my opinion, in retrospect, their source of motivation. This is what I mean. So not looking at what prevents the person from progressing, which is what Procall focuses on quite often. Procall is someone, in my opinion, that I've come to know through conversation, that they think about all the blocks that can stop a person from doing something, which is very habitual state for the individuals that I interact with. The ones that find, I guess, maybe the things that I say a bit refreshing because it's often at odds with what they're saying. And it's not that I'm trying to change their mind, but it can be used to add to it, add to their imagination. I typically look at things that can keep someone going, not all the things that can stop the person. So, like if you're playing a video game, are you thinking about it as a level cap being something that you must prevent, that is there to stop you? Or is that a level cap is a designation of your progress moving forward? So those are two different things. It's like half glass empty and half glass full. If someone keeps focusing on, like, the reason why I know this is I spend more time arguing going forward versus counter arguing slowing down. However, this would definitely be number one. This would be number two. And number three is stopping. So, and it's a no contest. Usually I'm presenting the case of going forward because most people are talking about stopping. a few people talk about slowing down, but generally not. It's usually the combination of going forward and slowing down versus stopping. And yesterday I got really into it the moment that when I was presenting motivation, Procol framed the motivation in a form of prevention. That is the opposite of motivation. It's stopping, it's fearing, like it's how to demotivate someone. So obstacles can be seen as how do we demotivate people versus motivate them, right? If number goes up, it's usually left uncapped. Like you're trying to make it seem like there's no cap or potential to the number going up. That is a motivating design. When you add a level cap and things that prevent you from the number going up, that's demotivating. Now, demotivating can be rewarding to overcome. So overcoming adversity can be very rewarding. Those are two different things, right? Two different things. I definitely appreciate when people look at games, for example, as an obstacle. And what I was emphasizing is, do you look at it exclusively as an obstacle? In my opinion, you don't have to exclusively look at it as an obstacle. You can also look at it as an opportunity. So when you combine these two, there are times when you're stuck on something, right? Like when you're stuck on an obstacle, opportunity takes over. What can I do? What can I try? That is one of the biggest, in my opinion, one of the most notable definers between me and the people that I have talked to. When they see an obstacle, they see it as exclusively something that is there to prevent them from succeeding. When I see an obstacle, I see it as both something that is going to prevent me from achieving my goal, and immediately I ask myself, what can I do about it? Because it's an opportunity to learn and get better. So despite the obstacle being there, I'm spending a lot of time developing skills to overcome this obstacle because it's an opportunity. So an opportunity is positive. An obstacle is negative. So the biggest defining feature about learning a language is that when you see a problem, if you have a problem understanding a concept, like in Japanese, for example, do you see it as exclusively an obstacle? If you do, then you have no reason to change up your methods. You have no reason to learn, critically think, improve your strategy, or look at other things, because you only see it as, oh, I have a method. And that method was supposed to solve everything. Or someone, something is supposed to provide me the method to overcome that obstacle. So when this fails, it is exclusively something that sucks. You can't do anything about it. And the easiest way to do it is to accept that you suck, that you can't overcome this obstacle. My first thought is whenever I hit an obstacle, I immediately think of it as an opportunity. Okay, so now what can I work on? What can I do? If this is boring, how can I make it exciting? Right? If I'm already N3 and this is N5, what can I do to make it feel engaging as N3? Obstacles, however inconvenient or trivial they are, is also opportunities to flex or do something. And I mean not like flexing, showing off, more like flexing, becoming flexible, right? When you know something already really well and you know more than it, it creates flexibility. And flexibility creates opportunity. Like for example, all the businessmen who see that people get obstructed by obstacles, what do? They sell you something. They sell you the opportunities that they see. There's a demand for this. People suck at overcoming an obstacle, but they see opportunity. They figured out how to overcome that obstacle, and opportunity strikes more than once, honestly. People who think of opportunities tend to capitalize on opportunity. I know, boy, another American talking about capitalization and opportunistic behavior. It's fair enough that it goes hand in hand, right? It goes hand in hand. Those who see opportunity are also those who are opportunists, right? That's the whole idea of looking at opportunities. So whenever I see someone having problems, I run towards it. It's not that I see it as an opportunity to make money, but it is an opportunity for me to help someone. So when someone says, yeah, I'm tired of my language learning journey, tell me a little bit about it. Let's go find more opportunities. Let's go point out and pick out opportunities. You tell me this is boring, I'll tell you a story to make it more interesting. And then hopefully from telling the person the story, I'm demonstrating how if you have to eat for the 100th time, it doesn't have to mean the same thing. If you're eating the same bread 100 times, it doesn't have to be the same event. Or like, there's so many things you can empower yourself to change. So I just wanted to remind people that when I'm reading through this topic, I get excited to read over textbooks, research, because of all the things I've just said. The last 15 to 20 minutes, I'm trying to illustrate how do you do something for a very long time if it's the same thing, or if it's exhaustingly mundane or boring because you already know it. The unfortunate or hard to understand answer is I don't do the same thing. I rarely ever do the same thing. When you get smarter, quote unquote smarter, I don't mean more intelligent, like higher IQ or suddenly your brain grows bigger or something. I'm talking about when you get smarter, as in more experienced, learn more. When you actually learn and comprehend more over time, things no longer look the same. It rarely ever looks the same. Because you actually learned it. You actually learned, comprehended the material. So when you go back to anything, it's never going to be the same ever again. If you didn't learn anything and memorize a bunch of things, then it will be the same boring garbage over and over again. It's going to feel less and less substantial, less and less meaningful, because it really literally is the same thing. So, in my opinion, this is one of the greatest litmus tests to your learning and comprehension. If you want to test yourself and ask yourself, do you understand or have learned from your experiences? Like, truly learned about like how to appreciate things. And when you go back to something like this, you would have appreciation for it. You're like, that's where I started. Man, do I know so much more than this. In fact, I'm going to sit down and write this in N3. Like, do it. Because that is what you can do now. So when you look back on things, it ends up being retrospection. When you learn something in the future and you have grown and changed, intuitively a human being will look back and do something basic and know what they have learned. Learn the appreciation of how far they have gone and what they can do. The ones that memorize things, in my opinion, and compartmentalize, it will continue to be the same thing over and over again. It's to the point where there's a chance nostalgia can help, but it is not sufficient. It will still be dull and boring the second time around because nostalgia can only do so much. nostalgia is fleeting, in my opinion. It's very tenuous and short. Like, go back to playing an old game, which is what I'm doing, by the way. I'm playing Persona 3 Portable, right? It's 20 years ago since I played Persona 3. And I go back, and the first thing I can hear a younger person, or maybe even older, a jaded, cynical adult who hasn't changed very much or hasn't grown very much. Hypothetically, I'm not tackling any particular person. If this happens to coincidentally sound like you, I apologize in advance. My intent is to encourage those people, like, you're more than that. You can do more than that. But it does suck when the things you thought you liked, and then you go back, they become boring, with the exception of nostalgia. And nostalgia is very fleeting. So, like, you play a game, let's just say you play a game when you were 18 years old, and now you're 40, like myself, pretty close to 40, and you go back to playing the game, and you're like, man, this game's garbage. Like, it's like PS2 graphics, and the stories are terrible. Like, they're like so out of touch with today's date and stuff. It's like, whoa, you're not 18 anymore. So the idea is, even when someone is angry and they can contextualize their current state and their knowledge, that's more than someone else who says, yeah, I'm not going to play that game. I already know what's in it. It's the same game. I'll never go back and play the game again. That is someone who hasn't grown or comprehended or grew, like, aged or matured into, like, later on. Because when you go back to something, it is very difficult to like suddenly unlearn 20 years of experience. Like, if I go back to an old game, I will have so much to say about it, because I'm still learning now. Like, anytime I talk about P3, I constantly talk about it with today's environment, right? Today's video games, current live service games, Power World, Subnautica. It's so difficult to not think about other things now when I'm playing it. So I was 18 years old. There's not, in my opinion, it's unfathomable how much more experience and knowledge I have now in the 20 years between now and when I was 18. Well, technically 21 years now and when I was 18. So when I'm reading this, it's only been 2.5 years. Like, 2.5 years. When I was first learning this, all it can actually say is this. Maybe some English translation, and maybe now I can spend 5 hours talking about the intricacies of a simple phrase, right? And almost effortlessly, in my opinion, at least in English. Obviously, I can't say it. I can't do something that I haven't done, which is to explain all of this intricacies at the level I can explain English. However, I can do it in English now. I can talk about kimi wa, right? And situations. So that to me is how you know you have learned and comprehended something. Because they're part of you now. It's associated with your memory. You can't read these sentences without thinking, oh, I could have said more. Do it. Show yourself that you can do it. It can be a positive thing. It can be a negative thing. If it's boredom, I think that, in my opinion, shows more of something else than actual level and comprehension. When it's boring, you're relying on complacency. So it's not that you still might have learned it, right? Learned the thing. I wouldn't go as far as saying comprehension. Comprehension to me, like, this is my qualifications. Other people have lower or different ways to quantify comprehension. For myself, comprehension is something that involves internalization. It becomes a part of you. It's something that you understand so well that it is effortless to do it. So like it is effortless for me to sit here and explain something I already know, and then explain something that I know beyond this, and explain and do something with it that is well beyond this. That is comprehension. Learning, you can still do learning without comprehension, for sure. For me, I'm a stickler. Learning to me involves memorization, analysis, contextualization, and creation. And usually, what is creation? How does creation work for me? Teaching. Teaching is creation. You have to be able to creatively instruct someone else, either yourself, to remind yourself, or convince someone else that you understand, as in comprehend, a topic by integrating it with that other person. So when that person needs an analogy to understand a complex topic that you understand but they don't understand, that would be a level of comprehension. It would demonstrate that you actually comprehend the concepts. Now, that doesn't mean you could be wrong and right, or differing and alternative. Then you go back to the board and see it as an opportunity to learn more, right? When you were misinformed or misunderstood something, miscomprehension is still an attempt to comprehend it. And when someone corrects you or challenges you, you see it as an opportunity, not an obstacle. And that's where all this comes back full circle. Anyways, thought I share why it's such a big deal to read with intent and creativity. It makes things less boring over time. All right, so I won't be doing that. Sorry, that was a weird transition. Make and use the polite and negative form of verbs, right? So we're doing the polite negative form of verbs, which is basically to use tenego, right? Mas, the mas form, and to conjugate or change the form of the ru and u verbs. So you can say something politely in a negative sense, right? Okay, let's go. In this topic, we're going to learn how to take auxiliary verbs. Yeah, they're usually called auxiliary. So auxiliary verbs and attach them to regular verbs. That's how they're phrasing it. Interesting. Mas is an auxiliary, and mas is like nai, and or mas is like, oh man, actually I'm not quite sure what qualifies as an auxiliary word outside of mas. I'll have to keep it in mind. I wanted to say des would be an auxiliary thing. I'll keep in mind about that. Okay, auxiliary verbs are dependent words. Oh, that's all they want to call it. Okay, dependent words. But an auxiliary verb, is iru an auxiliary verb? Probably, right? Or could be. Is arus, like aru, iru, suru, iku, skeru? I think they can function as auxiliary verbs. It's something like their meaning can be dependent on, we'll see. It's a dependent word, right? Are dependent words that cannot be used unless attached to some. Oh, okay. Well, those aren't good. Suru can be used alone. So, okay. So they're qualifying that anything that can't stand alone. Interesting. I'll have to see if I can make a list of those currently. That group with regular words to change their meaning or nuance. Yeah, this part I understand. That's why I picked like iku, aru, suru, tsukeru, because there are phrases that are so commonly attached. Maybe that's like an exception, like a nuance. There are phrases like that involve hiku, right? Hiku, skeru, ukeru, suru, aru, iku, au even, where the phrases are so commonly associated with something else that they can't mean the thing without it being attached to something else. And it's not quite that they have to attach specifically to another verb or another form, but it can be like a particle that's constantly, like maybe like kaze o hiku, right, to catch a cold. Hiku in that hiku in that sense is so refined to the idea of kaze, or like hairu, right, to go into something. Maybe I think obviously they're being more rigid, stringent here. We'll see in the future. I've been trying to get used to these grammar terminology for some time now. In this lesson, we will focus on mas and nai. Mas allows us to convey verbs politely, right? Tenego, the mas form. While nai will allow us to say that something is not happening, right? So when you combine mas and nai, you can say that something is not happening politely. Or different ways. Masen would be the naides. We will also see the polite negative form, yeah, masen, and the semi-polite negative form, naides.
私はピアノを弾きます。
Yeah. So hiku, so hiku is they immediately use hiku. For example, hiku, it means play, but it actually really means play a string instrument. So you could kind of say it's a pseudo auxiliary verb, so to speak.
友人はゴミを拾わない。
Hirowanai, to pick up something. Okay. So this is just the negative form, right? So we got polite, negative, and then we have semi-polite with des.
黒板が見えないです。
Right. Kokuban.
改札が開きません。
Oh, they describe it as a ticket barrier as opposed to like a ticket booth. Kaisatsu ga. Oh, because no. Yeah, okay. I guess ticket barrier. Fair enough. Negative polite, semi-polite. So these are self-explanatory. Although we've just seen the conjugation rules for how to attach mas, right? Masen and nai. Let's take a closer look at the mechanics behind this. It is simpler than it seems. Usually it's simpler, hence using it. Oh, they have tables. I do like tables. 1 and 5 row. Oh, now I get to understand what they mean by row. Oh, because it is flipped. So because of where I started, right, I actually have this as up here. So this is in this row. This is represented as row, and this is represented as columns. Like, so at the flip side, now I understand what they mean by row and column, because they're viewing it as the inverse, the opposite side. Should I start viewing it this way? Do I like it this way or the other way? It's okay. First, let's remind ourselves how verbs conjugate. In Japanese, ru verbs are called one row, right? Ichidan verbs. They're called one row. Interesting. Does that change my interpretation of columns? And then u verbs are called phiro, like godan verbs. This is due to how their conjugation behaves on a on a standard kana. Yeah, it doesn't change anything. Either it would mean 5 columns, 5 columns, or one column. And dan is a section, so it can be a row or a column. At least personally, like this simply says one grouping, and a grouping could be interpreted as a row or a column, right? They're groupings, so one group versus 5 groups, or section. It doesn't have to be interpreted as row. Okay, so ru verbs are called one row as their possible endings are locked into only one row. Yep, I see. Because that means that the stem of the ru will always end in an e or an e sound. So ru ichidan verbs have a stem ending in an e sound are called upper one row. Upper one row. Upper one row verbs. Jo ichidan or sa ichidan. Oh, kami, really? Kami ichidan. Like God. Oh, interesting. Kami ichidan. Okay. Maybe I should view it as a row now. This does affect the column and the row situation, because it's the upper row, upper one row would make it visible. No, kind of falls apart. And ichidan verbs that have a stem ending in an e are called lower one row. Oh, I see. I would view it, then it is more functional to view it as rows as opposed to columns, because then you know that the neutral, the center row, is the u column. So the upper one row, right? Kami ichidan is the e column, and I'm guessing if that's kami, is this a special read as well, or is it shita? Shimo. Interesting. Shimo ichidan, which is one below. So in this case, it is far more convenient to view it that way. I mean, I could change this up as well and just say hidari or something. Hidari and migi, so left and right columns. Left one column, right one column, which probably will end up taking a different read as well. If they're using kami and shimo, what would be equivalent for hidari and migi? Or it could be as simple as using something like na or sa and what's right? I'll have to think about this. I think we'll use this convention then. So I should try to reframe everything in rows and columns, like flip my rows and columns. Okay. This is because they occupy one row of the kana table, and one being upper and one lower. We can clearly see this in the chart below. Okay. Fair enough. There are 2 blanks here. 3 blanks. So, right. Wait. That's kind of weird to look at. Look at it this. Okay. Hold up. Okay, so these are the plane forms, right? And then they're talking about the endings of them. So things that end with e. Okay, right. On the other hand, Godan verbs are called 5-row verbs as their possible conjugations cover all 5 rows of the kana table, which we can see below. Okay, hold on. And then they changed it to katakana, the table to katakana. Interesting. Right, and then they took one. Oh, okay. And then they're showing different verbs on each column. Yeah, because it go across all 5 rows. And they're showing the different godans. Oh yeah, because this is oo. Wait, wait. What? The column. What? Ka? What? Okay. Wait. So that means this is next to, right? So ra, ri, ru, re, do. Okay. And all of these are separate. No. My head hurts. Wait, so are these all different forms of the same, with the same character? Yeah. Well, these are all the stems. This table and this table are different, so I'm having a problem viewing it. So right, because the middle, right? The middle is the plain form. So now the middle is the plain form of the verb. So they chose separate verbs and a plain form. And then all the other ones are different conjugated forms of them. Like, for example, this row is the potential form. This row, is that attached to volitional? So yeah, all the other ones outside of the middle are different. Key. I guess this could be attached to the stem form. Like, it can be attached to mas. Could be like attached to the negative form, or for negation. Okay. I sort that out in my head, anyways. So we end up with a series of possible forms to which auxiliary verbs can attach. Right here. This one they still added the thing, but yeah, this would be the form the auxiliary verbs attached to. For do verbs, we end up with a multi-purpose stem, right? And this would be a lower row, like a lower row ichidan. What the heck is happening here? Oh, okay. It's contrasting this, okay. For u verbs, we end up with 5 possible conjugations corresponding to the columns and rows on the kana table. In this case, we have possibilities for hanasu. And now they're writing it as a column, as a row, which helps because we were viewing it as a row? No, we weren't. Oh no. Now they flipped it. Now they place the a e u e o as a row, or like from left to right, as opposed to okay, that's fine. That's just turning them. All right, fair enough. Yeah, right. So we have hana attached to sa, shi, su, right? So it's hanasu, and then these are the other stems or conjugated forms. Add a little something. Once we have the correct starting form, we simply glue whichever auxiliary verb we want to use onto the appropriate conjugation. For example, we know mas and nai, and the negative form of mas, and the negative form of masen. Yeah, this is great. I think I should start doing this, like doing this as I'm filling in the grammar points. I was having trouble with sorting this out, like how to organize this in my head. So I started already doing this for all the forms, and then like the causative, passive, volitional, potential, present progressive, conjunctive, to name a few, just to name a few, right? I wonder if they're gonna organize this for what I have been referring to as compound verbs, where you take a part of one verb and then add it to another verb to create a compound verb. I don't know what that's called yet, so it'll be interesting to see how they organize it. So now you take tabe, right? And then we know that taberu, and then we know that this is ichidan, and ichidans are one row below. Oh no, we already decided. This is the one row below, right? That creates the stem, the singular stem. And then we know that now if we sort them out based on the being like right, I, u, e, o. So now we know that u is the taberu, and then e is over here. What? Oh yeah. Because this is the e row, but tabe is the it's a one row stem, so there's no change in that. So then tabemasu, tabemasen. Why is it se? Oh, wait. Why is it se? I guess you just remember that part, right? Abenai, you're right, one row. And nai desu. So I was thinking maybe they were arranging this because this is the sa, right? The a, I, u, e, o, right? But I don't understand why they would highlight this, because this would be the e roll, not the e row if it was sen or e, right? I guess you could juxtapose it to, like, juxtaposed next to this makes it more vivid here. So then hanashi, right? Hanashimasen. And then hanasanai and hanasanai desu. I like this. I like this with the exception of tabe, like the ichidan. The ichidan are a little bit difficult to appreciate without the godan next to them. Like, why in this particular order? Since this is unified, or like this is the one stem, it's hard to justify where they go, like the endings where they go. However, in retrospect, when you're placing it next to the godan verbs, it becomes the reason why they are in these columns, like, or in these rows, like these specific, or in these columns. Yes, in these columns. If you look at it as a whole table. Interesting. Drill, drill, drill. Learning verb conjugations feel a little tricky at first, but luckily Japanese conjugation is overall very predictable. It's true, it's very predictable. It can be picked up quickly with a little practice, yeah. In topics which cover conjugation rules, there will be a link to our conjugation game, yeah. Conjugation found. Eventually, I'll probably use this approach. I like this approach. This is a great way to organize things. And we'll apply a matrix approach. Not like Matrix the show, but a matrix approach. Like, you know, columns and rows. And then see if I can organize it while doing this task. That's definitely an interesting way to present a logistical way to sort out the data. I really like this presentation. Although I would say combining these to juxtapose each other is how I'm viewing it, because there's no actual reason to place these things in here, since this stem is singular, it's across the board. However, organizing it this way means that it will line up with how the a, I, U, E, O lineup is. Interesting. I like it. All right, this is probably the last topic. Oh man, this table is really interesting. This is a very appropriate context of why they chose to refer. It explains why they refer to the things as rows as opposed to columns. So that explains a very frequently occurring thing. This table is fantastic. It takes a bit to get used to. So I'll probably refer back to this table fairly often in the future. And I like this concept where you organize the, like, so basically, eventually when we go through the topics, maybe like when they release the N4, right, the N4 block, this will be then filled in with all of the other forms too. Like, for example, this column would be the potential form, right? I already started doing it when I was looking at this table up here. So like the potential form will be here. Volitional will probably be here. Two volitionals. Volitional casual, volitional pene. Sa will probably take on causative. Probably this column is going to be passive. Okay. That gets my juices going right there. Organization, so good. All right, in the garden with mom. Let's listen to this.
娘、これは木？ 母。桜の木ね。娘。桜の木は大きいね。花が咲く？母。そう、春、花が咲くよ。今日は咲かないよ。娘。今日は花が見えない？母。そうです。秋は花が見えません。春、花が開くよ。娘。早く綺麗な花が欲しいね。
Aw. Okay. These ones are really good. Oh, sorry. So the musume, right? Musume is the daughter, and then we have haha, for the mother. So musume says, "Kore wa ki?" Is that a tree? Or more like, yeah, I guess. Is this a tree? Oh, sorry, this, right? Is this a tree? The way she's pointing, it feels like it's still far away from her. Like oftentimes when I say kore, I'm thinking, I'm kind of imagining them like being right on top of it, or they're like holding on to it. But the girl is asking, is this a tree, right? And it's like, like yes, sakara no ki ne. So it's a cherry blossom tree, or what is to be the beginning of a cherry blossom tree, since it's very tiny right now. And then the musume, sakara no ki wa oki ne. That's saying that they're supposed to be big, right? Hana, like they're big. Sakara no ki, big trees. So hana ga saku, right? Are the flowers going to bloom, right? So cherry blossoms are big. Do flowers bloom, or do they, like, are the flowers going to bloom situation? And then the mother says, so yes, in hare, no, haru, in the spring, right? In the spring. So even though it doesn't say like in the spring literally, is spring implied is referring and talking about spring as the response. And then hana ga sakuyo, the flowers will bloom. So it didn't literally say in spring, although could say that if she wanted, I suppose. Like haru ni saku ga sakuyo, right? Kyo wa sakanai yo. So right now they're not going to, or it won't bloom today, right? So right, in spring flowers bloom. So right, in is implied, despite not using the particle ni, or a time, or when. Right, this is contextual. So it won't bloom today, right? With an addition of a lot of the use cases. So they blend in quite a lot of the previous topic stuff, especially ne, yo, to confirm or seek confirmation, right? And then what was this? This was, we had verbs, right? We had verbs. They're plain forms at the moment. Plain forms. And then they showed the negation, right? Is this the introduction for play? No, yes, they talked about nai in this one. So nai, adjective, topic marker. They go over no yet? I'm not sure they went over no yet. Okay. I don't see anything else that they added. All right, and then musume, today, right? Today, I can't see flowers, right? I won't see flowers. Like flowers will not be visible, basically. Today, flowers will not be visible as a question form. So this is demonstrating the whole you can you can make it into a question without necessarily using ka, right? This would be part of the topic with ka, which is how she's asking questions with an up speak without using the unknown marker ka. In fact, I don't think the girl used ka at any point, despite asking a question. So that's part of the ka thing. And so this, I don't think something. Not sure if this point was gone over yet. And then in the fall, right? So in the fall, you're not going to see, and she's using polite. She's softening using the polite form of something that is negative. So yeah, you're not going to be able to see flowers in the fall. And then she's doing the same thing again, haru. So concerning haru or contextual haru, the flowers will bloom, right? Or open. But I interpret this as still bloom. It's another way to express that. Now, the interesting thing is they swapped it up for open. And I did have this problem before where instead of using saku, you can use hiraku for blooming as well. And they both, so same thing with Chinese. There are multiple ways to express blooming, and it's kind of, I guess, perhaps preferential or some sort of nuance that I'm not aware of that they would flip the two. However, in that context, opening can imply blooming as well. And then musume haiku, right? Haiku, I don't think we went over adverbials yet. No, we haven't yet. And then kirei na, we did go over na adjectives, and kirei is one of the exceptions. And I also talked at length about how kirei, I visualize kirei as in the kanji kirei. That's how you know, that's how I know it's a na adjective. However, kirei is used so often, it's often mimetically represented as kirei. So you have to also remember kirei na. That's one of the, it's not as, in the words of Bunpro writers, they would say it's so frequent that you'll remember it simply by reading Japanese, that kirei na sounds right. When you say something like kirei hana, that sounds a little off, like something is missing over time. So kirei na hana, right? So pretty, hurry, basically, I want to see, hoshi. I don't think we went through hoshi yet. So hoshi, and then ne, like different form of ne, and to hurry to I want to see soon, right? Hayaku. So this hayaku still requires a topic. I imagine it's coming up soon. We use adverbials or converting like hayai into hayaku. Hayaku versus hayai. The relationship between that. I really enjoy how they're very much trying to cover the different representations of the same topic that they covered earlier. Now, the one that is missing is ka, which I'm genuinely curious how often how it comes up, if that's more of an adult thing or because this is a kid, we have to contextualize that this is a younger person. So is it because the younger person would prefer instinctively to upspeak instead of using a unknown marker, or unknown marker is far more formal and maybe even literary, which also reflects in adulthood why there's a void of a ka marker in at every angle. That would be one of the topics that I would reflect on. And also, there's also the constant flexing of using so versus so des. That's another thing. I'm not entire. That will likely be a topic. Like, what are the degrees of so and so des? And there isn't necessarily she could have said so des here, I think, because they kind of represent different degrees of agreement or acknowledgement. Because she went from so des. All of these are different, like, nuances of how to affirm, like, and that to me is this is a very important point to me, because when I'm talking to someone, I mean, I don't talk to like 4-year-olds or 5-year-olds per se. However, the difference between someone who's like, I'm 40, right, almost 40, and I'm talking to someone who's 20, I do pay quite a lot of attention to how I'm giving affirmation. That stuff really is important to me. So this stuff is hard to appreciate at the moment. I rarely use I sometimes use so, and I most definitely use so des far more, largely because of the situation that I'm typically in. Anyways, I think that's gonna be our topics for today. I didn't realize how much I would be talking about these topics. So we'll just continue doing this from until day 200, the 200 tentative takes, and maybe leave the rest. I'm not sure if I'm gonna end up finding time going through this. I absolutely enjoy this. This feels like learning at my pace, like at my desire. I enjoy learning this way. Now, is it efficient? Not. I think if I had to take a guess on the current archetype, the vast majority of young people, like in high school, and maybe people who are anxious and they think that Japanese journey can be like brute force and mass volume in a year, this would be far too slow. The way I'm going about it, like when they say read 2 minutes, maybe I would spend 2 minutes if it was 2.5 years ago. Like when I first started by reading this topic, perhaps I would go through it quicker. I would probably say no. I would be fairly slow too. If I was 18 years old, I might have gone through it in 2 minutes. That's probably what I would say here. So, if it's 2 minutes to someone, then it's only 2 minutes worth of value to someone. For myself, it's obviously way more than 2 minutes. It's almost like 10 to 20 minutes a topic at this point, provided I just don't spiral into the actual thing. So anyways, I'm enjoying this. I don't want to do this habitually though, because I do want to keep going through vocabulary or like work on my vocabulary routine. For now though, we'll do this for the next 2 days, because there's the 98th and the 99th, and then I'll have a fairly good enough idea of what I'm going to say about the topic section. I really like this. This is pretty much how I learn things now. Like, it's far closer than the things I have done up to this point. Like, what I mean is, the literal things that Wanikani and Duolingo, for example, I don't have that much experience, right? Wanikani, Duolingo, and even things that people suggested, like Satori Reader, Anki decks. I looked at some of those Anki decks. Some people showed me some of the Anki decks. And what else? Easy listening podcasts. Their favorite podcaster, what gets thrown at my face a lot, Cure Dolly, right? Cure Dolly. Comprehensible Japanese, just to name a couple that I remember people sharing. Mikaku. No, it's not Mikaku. Is it? Yeah, Mikaku. Like sentence mining of some sort, playing Ace Attorney, that type of thing, and mining from Ace Attorney. I would say this is a lot closer to where I would start. So how I would start is I would be blending a bunch of explicit instruction, creative pieces. So introduction, methodical, organization, and an anecdote at all times. Like building something this complex as the foundation of learning, not as for an adult, like for someone older who has lots of memory, and defining the stuff in that person's memory. So this is not a practical way to design an app, or it's not a practical way because the tools and resources will be pretty astronomical. You could argue AI could change that requirement, perhaps. The idea is you would start with a filter for the adults. So if you're trying to encourage older people to learn, not kids, right? That's a whole different story. Maybe like someone who's 30 or plus, is like a highly functional language in their native language already. And that's a really hard to filter. So you would have to create subsystems and tier systems to gauge first competence. For me personally, if I'm designing something, right? First you have to gauge competence, because everyone knows, that I plus one situation, the constant I plus one. So how do you measure I, right? First, you have to do that for your tool. Or you can decide everyone has the same I, which some tools do. Duolingo assumes that everyone has the same I before they start. Or they do the user-based I. User decides. In this case, it would be something like a platform like Anki. The user has to decide their I. So they will find their I. So they are liable for finding their I. Duolingo, for example, assume everyone is the same I. So you do that and then you skip. So it's kind of a slight combination of the two. However, the way they're designed initially is you're assumed to start in the same place. Meanwhile, Anki is completely user reliant, to give an example, obviously. So for this, you can use a dynamic filter system. And dynamic is a fancy word for, it's a complicated system that requires this, like a survey, an initial survey, and it's dynamic. You could try to use like agentic AI or something, or something that's personable. So then if it's something personal, like based on my system of evaluation, like I already talked about my qualifications for learning, comprehension, critical thinking skills, and problem solving skills, I would probably try to integrate some sort of questionnaire that I have found over my lifetime to gauge level of competence. And my competence measurement would be how good is the person's critical thinking skills. And when I mean good, I don't mean how performing it is, how regular it is, how habit forming it is. So if I can gauge someone's critical thinking skills, then you can kind of tailor a bit, filter the systems of how much you need, right? For example, someone who has low critical thinking skills, in my opinion, would likely find the anecdotes, like the example, they need to be relatable. If someone's critical thinking skills are habitual, then the anecdote could be more complex. The idea is to get a gauge of, then you would have multiple tiers where how is the grammar being explained, how is it being organized, and how it's being presented in their examples. That would be like, that sounds overly complicated because it is, right? This would be the individualized approach. You would try to come up with a method where someone, when they engage in your tool, it would be individualized. And obviously now someone say like, well, AI can try to do that. AI can try to do that. It's like, yeah, I understand. That's one of the reasons why there's an AI push, where AI could try to covariantly gauge multiple levels of assessing competence, and at the same time produce things in response to corollary data, right? AKA the data set. The alternative is, in my opinion, something like this, where it's a combination of explicit instruction, organizational skills, and anecdotes. I already said this before, but when the younger you get, right, we'll pick something that we already learned or read. The organizational skills, I would say, if you look at this breakup, right, this is usually a child. This is usually a young adult right now. This is most adults. And this is learners. Or learners in a sense of creators. Adults still. So in both cases, this last part, these two are adult oriented. Where it's not that it's good or bad, because remember, we have pros and cons for this. When you only read the introduction, you save time. Time is down, and you get the gist, right? Then this introduces memory. It's memory prone, and time then goes up again a little bit, right? Time goes up. And then time still, like overall, total time goes up, right? However, this time investment also goes up. Memorization takes 1-to-1. So while you add this, total time still goes up. However, now you have a good ratio of time, because analyses, when you have details and organization of the data, it actually reduces the ratio of time per things remembered. It compresses the information. However, your total time is still going up, like to do all three of these things. It sounds obvious because if you read the introduction, you read the grammar, you read the details, you're spending more time. That's an objective way to look at it, for sure. Now the question is, the reason why I'm saying these things is, how often do you do this with everything? Like when you play a video game. This is what I mean by children do introduction. Young adults do the introduction and the explanation. And I'm talking about circa 2026 here. And then adults may be interested in the details, like the comparison and the context, like the organization of the details, right? And then practice is when you really want to create and manipulate and apply that information. So in a video game sense, when someone says a tutorial, if you're thinking about a tutorial, right? This is how I'm defining this stuff. When you're looking at a tutorial, how often does a child go beyond the introduction? They don't. They look at a general gist and then they play the game. Where are they going to get the rest of these things? By doing. Right? They default to doing. Young adults, they want the thing to be explained right now. And then confirm the doing. Adults would want to know the relationship between those things and the things they want before making an informed decision. Right? Those are like the higher propensity. I'm not saying adults don't have a propensity. It's a tiered system. So this way. So intro down here, grammar, details, practice. Right? So I'm not saying that adults don't do intros. I'm talking about typically the higher you go, the more quote-unquote complex the application is. So like closer and closer to creation, basically, to output, right? And that's how I'm organizing it. So when you're playing a video game, where do you stop when it comes to educating yourself? Typically kids stop the moment they get a generalization, like an introduction. And then the young adults might be curious a bit about explaining how to win in a game. At most, explaining the things they don't know yet. So like what is the objective of the game? And then they stop because they could care less about the details. Right? I'm genuinely not saying it's a bad or a good thing. It's an honest thing. You ask yourself, if I had to watch someone, like watch a kid start a video game, like they stream, like there are kids who are 16 or sometimes even younger with a supervision, and they like release their content, and I would watch them play a video game, like if a puzzler or an action game, and I would look at their behavior. Sometimes they don't even get to introduction. They simply bypass it and then do, right? That's the whole, in my opinion, the incredibly misapplied or overrepresented way of looking at language, where you have an adult and say, how do you learn a language? Act like a kid again. Just immerse yourself and do. To me, I think that is a oversimplification, an incredibly oversimplification of how to get started. So if you want an adult to get started, just tell them immerse yourself. That's a way to get started. It's oversimplifying it, like, because you don't know how an adult is going to maintain that habit, organize the details, because they're not going to focus on. If you keep telling adult, just go do, go immerse. What is the adult going to have problems with? Time management, contextualizing, why it's important to them. What is the bigger scheme in the organization of the things? How is this going to fit into my lifestyle, and how am I going to output and practice these things? All those things are going to come up on a daily basis. A kid doesn't think about that. A kid is like, I'm just going to do this. I have no point of reference. I don't need to concern myself on how much time I have, so on and so forth. Something is provided for me, right? Most of those things are actually provided for the kid by an adult, right? So when it comes to video games, it applies to that too. And being a kid is not a bad thing. Sometimes I would love to feel young again, so I would go in not knowing anything, right? That's the feeling between an adult and a kid, right? A kid just dives in. And to feel young again as an adult, you can release your inhibitions and unrestrain yourself and dive into something impulsively or spontaneously. That's how you start feeling young again, because it's as though you're a kid. right? So it's not bad or good. Adults can try to want to experience being a kid again by doing something spontaneous without having to read the introduction, learn the basics and foundations explicitly, find the details and nuance before even starting something, right? That's me 100%, like nearly 100% of the time if I'm not doing it for a social exercise. Like if I'm not doing a social experiment, I'm typically doing all of these things while I'm doing things. Learning how to apply something while I'm gathering the details and being explained to me about something and how I would summarize it in my own words. Anytime I read something, that's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking of all those things. Now, you don't have to constantly do this. So most adults, when I mean most adults, is that they can get up to this level. It's not to say that they don't do the other thing. So you're doing all these things as you're going up. How young you are, this is what I mean by level of confidence. The things that you know well, right? The things that you comprehend, you're going to do all of these habitually. The things that you aren't competent in, they get lower as you're going. So, like, because it requires effort and interest and competence, comprehension. It requires understanding to want to do most of these tasks. So, to me, the topic section, if you're a young person, probably later in life, like when you're Japanese language learning, right? Should you start with topics? The answer is no. I would be apprehensive. It would require a more quote unquote mature thinking process. And there are kids that mature faster, right? Like that's the whole idea about maturing. When you're a kid that is really youthful and you love experimenting and you like pick up a lot of hobbies and drop a lot of hobbies very quickly, you're youthful. You haven't matured yet. But youthfulness has a benefit. You're more likely to try different things. Adults with a far more matured sense of thinking, they are more refractory, right? They have higher barriers of entry because of details and contextualization. So all this stuff should fall into place when you're thinking about this stuff. So it's not bad to be a kid. It's not bad to be a young adult. And various skills will have varying levels of commitment. Typically, hobbies for adults are very revitalizing. They can be very kid-like. Like, I don't care. It's not as important to me. I can spend more money on this. I'm not hyper-analyzing how I'm storing this stuff. I'm going to go in and have fun, right? And then when you think of work, like jobs, then the adults become this. They would analyze everything, do informed decisions, cost risk analyses, and then run through hypotheticals and simulation in order to get a reasonable informed decision about something that is very serious. And the younger you are when you treat a skill, you don't do that yet, right? And if you're young, if you're a child, you don't do that for most things. You don't think about the consequences and contextualize the cost, risk, and the supply, demand, and higher perspective. So, where am I going with this? I think this is really excellent in expanding Bunpro's appeal. Like, I think for a large majority of people who are much older and they are still academically inclined, as in they still learn things throughout their life, this would be a starting point. So like if you had a questionnaire and say, are you in education, or what is your professional background or something, or like are you in a position that you are still consistently learning? learning Japanese, starting with topics, would be a potential place. Like, I would legitimately start to learn Japanese this way first, not cramming kanji or getting random vocabulary thrown at you because you're bootstrapping through memorization tools and stuff. That is far more appealing for someone who's much younger, who rarely find incentive in wanting to know details until they get the foundations down, etc. Right? So this is incredibly far more engaging for example, someone like me. Like, presenting this stuff, presenting Japanese like this, which is what Duolingo was trying to do, in a different way, in an engagement-centric way. So that's where you have pros and cons about Duolingo's approach, because Duolingo is like, oh, here are some sentences. You're going to use it in this context. You'll learn if it's unnatural or natural when you get feedback, when you apply it. And it is up to you to have the competence or the critical thinking skills when you're out about traveling to create that. They lowered the barrier of entry by making all of this stuff as a doing process, right? So it makes everyone into a child. They assume they're a child willing to do something. And hopefully that by doing that, they have an adult perspective on how to apply it. Which, unfortunately, this is a big hope. This is a really big hope. Generally speaking, if someone is already doing something, adults would require, in my opinion, nowadays, the modern way of thinking typically requires some sort of explainer with it. And that's where you get, where's my grammar explanation, Duolingo? Like, did you ever consider the nuances of native speech and colloquialism? Why are we learning must form before we learn the casual form or dictionary form, right? So adults, so Duolingo does this. Introduction, practice. Nothing in between. So what happens is, in my opinion, you have the child, low barrier to starting, which is predicated on habit formation. So you get someone doing quickly on a regular basis to establish habit. Habits are both effective for a child and an adult, right? Because again, pyramid. Habit is on the bottom. Habit is fundamental. So both children and adults can benefit from establishing a habit immediately. And then Duolingo cut out the middle and went straight to application. That's their design anyway. Like, not that they cut all of it out. It's not as girthy as, like, there's no, it's not tailored up point. So the frequency is, application is overrepresented. Output, basically. Output is overrepresented, which is the creation standpoint. So it feels like a lot of times you're doing like 60% of this. You're like doing, 10% of this. Right. And then you're doing 30% of this. So in the middle is where all the criticism is about Duolingo. Like, where's my explanation? Where's organizing this? Where's my feedback? Right? Where's my feedback? Where's my context? Right? That's Duolingo's thing, where you're combining the essential low barrier of entry to establish a habit, and then the rest is application. And both application and habits feed into its retention and its its ubiquity, not necessarily its natural development of comprehension. This doesn't necessarily develop comprehension or encourage comprehension. Children will likely not develop comprehension very well, and that's one of the criticisms of Duolingo. You can use Duolingo for 6 years and only memorize, and nothing happens, right? You memorize and there's no comprehension. And then adults would have a struggling time leaping from the application to why they want to use it. So oftentimes you'll find an adult like, oh, I really like using Duolingo, but I also know I'm not learning very much, not comprehending very much. That's usually what an adult, in my opinion, someone who's older would say, like, I don't see the connection. Like, it doesn't seem like the things are connected. I know I can use it and I can do it very well, like mechanically very much, but I just don't see what's the point. Like, why is this rewarding? Why is this supposed to? Largely because the other infrastructure is not there. Now, you can still be someone who can fill in this gap, which is what I typically do. Whenever there's a gap, I fill it in. Remember the earlier today's topic is opportunity versus obstacle. So if you're a problem solver, which typically I do assume that most people who say they're adults, right? They're adult thinkers. They are problem solvers. They have the properties of critical thinking skills. So when someone sees a deficiency, they will fill it in. And what do adults typically do? They pick a grammar source, like a Genki textbook or something, and continue to use Duolingo while reading their Genki things. They can pick up Bunpro. And then this is what I mean by topics. This is where topics come in. Topics, Bunpro's grammar is a great, quote unquote, complement, not a supplement, a complement. So now we're talking about complementarity here. So what I give the benefit of doubt when someone says they are a competent learner, they're very experienced and educated, is the idea that they understand when they're using something, if there is a deficiency, they see it as an opportunity to overcome an obstacle. So usually when I talk to someone and they say, oh yeah, Duolingo does this for me and it doesn't do this for me. So that's why I'm using tool B, because I understand that what it does for me, I still want to keep. What it doesn't do for me, I have something else to replace it. Children, and I'm not talking about age here. I'm not talking about age. I'm talking about mental maturity in a skill. So not mental maturity like of the person, but of the skill they're working on. So if language learning is something new to you, your mental maturity is likely going to be low unless you have other skills that are transferable to that skill. So like someone who's in education, I use people who are educated as a point of reference, because if someone who's educated, they tend to stay in the state of being mental mature because most of their skills deal with learning. Now, outside of that, those are the exception, not the rule. Educators and educated are the exception, not the rule. Like, we're talking about people who focus on learning and acquiring skill, not people who refine and become specialists in a particular skill. They actually do stop learning on most things except for the thing that they have. So different situation. A learner versus a specialist. A specialist continue to refine something they have already learned very well and learn within that sphere. So not an expert, a learner. Someone who has something to learn consistently, right? And that's what I mean here. So if you're asking yourself like, man, I just want to do things and not worry and sweat the details later, see how much I learn on doing it, you're very youthful, very mentally immature. Yet maturity comes at a cost. Maturity comes with requirements, higher barriers of entry, restrictions, bottom lines, maximalization, maxing problems. Now, with all that said, this is wonderful. Like, Bunpro is trying to be in holistic. So Bunpro is going to try to appeal to as many things as possible. And sure enough, I think I should be saying this for the 200 review. I'm working on my section on this. I think the team really did do a excellent knockout approach on this. This does feel a gap, like a missing gap. And that gap is intermediate learning. This is a great intermediary. It's helping you organize the information, applying what, in my opinion, what this is applying is the scientific method. It might not look like the scientific method for those who are not familiar with what the principles are, but you have to look at existing data as an introduction. What is existing or pre-existing, or things that you must contextualize first. Look at the methodology, like the methodical, objective things that can be measured or seen. Analyze the details, organize all of the pertinent details, or in this case is the collection of results, right? The details are the collection of the results that are related to the grammar, and then put it into practice, right? Put it into practice. In fact, there's more. There's like, you still have, technically you still have results at the end and then conclusion, which is what I'm doing. So the parts that I'm doing is I'm taking all of this. This includes the methods, right? Methodology and the abstract and introduction, right? So here's the primer, and then what comes of it is what I'm describing, the results and conclusion. So it's a great way, in my opinion, to help or to encourage how to think and organize your thoughts. It may be far more, the standout here is it may be far more approachable for adults or older people, because it tackles the natural progress, at least in my opinion, the natural process that incentivize older, like more mature people to want to engage in this. Is this going to change in the future? I don't really know. I think the learning capacity and learning people, the way things are being learned nowadays have changed remarkably because of the internet. And it's really refreshing that this is school. I mean, I'm not saying this is a bad thing. I actually genuinely think when something is absent for a very long time, it's considered refreshing, right? When you see something very often, it can become dull and cliche and trite, right? So in this case, this is back to the drawing board. This is fundamentally walking into a classroom. I enjoy this because that's the way I would do things. And when you read this, if you're reading and it's like, this is really dull and dry and I don't really care about it, and then you don't see that this is a way to organize data, organize information, and properly introduce a topic and support it, then that is your answer. That's what I mean by when someone tries to offer me advice and they try to educate me, they're not giving me any advice. They're not teaching me anything. They're sharing their opinion. And then when I ask them, why do you do this? And they're like, because it's the best. That's exactly what I mean. Or why do you do this? How do you do this? I'm like, I don't know. I just do it. Or I read it on a YouTube video, or like ChatGPT said so. Exactly. That's exactly what I mean. Teaching someone through the comprehension of a topic is very obviously displayed in a different manner. So when someone comes by and say, hey, you want my advice? I'm like, well, are you going to teach me something? Advice would involve getting the person to comprehend what you're saying. Coming by and saying, trust me, bro, you don't want to do that. You're going to regret it later. That doesn't say anything, in my opinion, when it comes to instructional advice. It's an opinion. In fact, it's fear-mongering. It's the most typical strategy to convince someone to follow someone else's direction. It's gaslighting. When you immediately say, hey, you're going to regret this if you don't do this, that's gaslighting. It's gaslighting using FOMO. So when someone opens their mouth, in my opinion, the first question they would ask if they're trying to say, I have your best interest in mind. I'm only telling you this to save you some future grief. That's already gaslighting. So instead, you say, hey, how do you feel about the current technique that you're using? I'm kind of curious. What are your thoughts and the reasons why you're starting here? And with that context, you're able to then use what they have and suggest something else as constructive feedback. That would be an adult, in my opinion, or someone who is an educator, someone who is likely there to be helping people. So, not a bad thing or a good thing. The idea is there's a difference between being appropriate and inappropriately misrepresenting what you're trying to do, with all the good intentions in the world, obviously. Like, I'm not talking about the person's character here. Like, someone could be genuinely trying to help. However, the way, at least in my opinion, the way that they're expressing to me does not indicate what they're trying to say. Like, someone says, I have the best interest in mind. You should do this or else you're going to regret it. That's not my best interest in mind. You didn't even know what my interest is. You literally have no idea what my best interest is. You didn't even ask. In fact, you probably, like, if I had to be bold, it took you 15 seconds to look at the general gist of things, and you thought you learned the grammar, the details, and then you applied your advice without ever thinking about anything. That is a child, immature, right? Immature, and lack critical thinking. That doesn't mean the child isn't innocent, kind, and willing to help. A child can be innocent, kind, and caring, all of that stuff, while still being immature, lacking critical thinking skills, and being unhelpful. Right? They come with the territory. So I genuinely like watching children trying to, like, learn how to share and do things and discuss and eventually grow into whatever they want to be, right? That is really wonderful. It also means that I acknowledge that they lack critical thinking skills and they are often unhelpful to me because they are innocent, willing to do things without thinking about it, right? These are hand in hand. Now, if you're wondering, well, can you be immature while having critical thinking skills at the same time? That's an interesting thought. I'm not entirely sure. Usually any one person can be multiple things. Like, you can be childish. You can be childish about video games, and then you can be mature about your work. So any one person at any given time can be many of these things. Now, there is a double standard here. If you are young and you are a child, that means you can't be an adult automatically. An adult can try to be a child again, or treat things childishly. An adult can choose sometimes to be immature, right? They can try because they have the experience to do so. A child doesn't have a choice. And that is usually where I would start talking about the concern about the internet. How young people start to learn things, right? They prefer not Bunpro. Like, I think Bunpro, like, hats off to the Bunpro devs. They really do try to encourage other different ways. Like, this is wonderful. Like, they are designing these things. They are trying to create multiple ways to engage and introduce someone of any age to consider different ways to learn something, right? That is like going to school. The intent of school was to throw you in many different scenarios so that a child can experiment and start to refine and hone their way of thinking. The internet doesn't do that, in my opinion. The internet picks the first thing you like. So, like, when you have a 13-year-old and they come on and the first thing they see is Roblox, then Roblox defined them. That's my problem with early learning, self-imposed learning. When you self-study doesn't come until later. A substantial amount of self-study, self-discipline, learning what's best for you and whatnot, that comes much later. Like introspection, well, you don't have any foundations. So I want to give an example, anecdotally speaking. There are 5 people over the last couple months that they keep thinking that they know how to best study. They keep telling themselves they know what's best for themselves. And they're inexperienced. They're like, they barely graduated high school and they already decided that there's only one way, a specific way. Dear me, it's like a repeat of the learning style stuff or teaching style stuff, which is a great myth. I am a very cautious person whenever I hear like an adult say that. I'm even more cautious when a young person says that. Like, if a 40-year-old says, oh yeah, this is the only way I'm going to learn how to become a mechanic, or this is the only way, I'm okay with that. I mean, 40 years, if it took them 40 years to refine that topic, then that's fine, I guess, as long as they're not upset about it. A child, they would think there's no choice. So like, someone's like, I don't understand how to critically think. I'm just not born that way. Like, I'm not born to have critical thinking skills. Well, yeah, you have to be sensitive because it's gonna feel like that when you're 13 years old and you come on and the first thing you like and the internet just reinforces that one thing over and over again. Then yeah, of course the child's gonna grow up 18 years old encountering multiple other things they have to solve, and their first thought is, let's turn everything into that. Case in point, a child learns better if you turn everything into a Roblox video. And now, if you're wondering, so what happens when the child is 18 years old and then they go to work and people say, well, we're not making Roblox videos of all of our content, and Roblox videos can't demonstrate to you how to deal with your grief and your motivational skills and whatnot. That's tough. Like, I'm not saying that there's no way out of it. I'm typically saying it's kind of disappointing that when the first obstacle that most people tell me is that they can't do something because they're so used to doing something else. And that's not them literally telling me. I asked them, what are you doing to learn right now? And it would be like, oh, I'm making a deck of this, and I'm making a deck of this, I'm making a deck of this, and I'm making a deck of this. Oh yeah, and I'm also taking that show and making a deck of it. And then I asked them, okay, so all the decks are different, right? Like, this deck has a different organizational skill than this deck, and then this deck must have some sort of like imagery thing and whatnot. Like, the different sources, the decks have different profiles, right? And when I look at their deck, it's like same thing, same thing, same thing, same thing, same thing, and the context changed. So they took one skill that they had, one way to learn something, and they generalized it to everything else and think that the context is going to help them learn better. That's, to me, I think that is what happens when you spend so much time online self-studying with no other examples provided for you. Like, no other person, you're not going to cross another person. So of course, in my opinion, most people are going to say immersion is the best strategy. And when I say immersion is the best strategy, their version of immersion, like whichever immersion they latched onto, however you identify, because guess what? Still up here. Immersion is the introduction. Did they learn the different methods? And then did they learn how to distinguish between the different forms of immersion? And then did they put those different forms into practice? No. And I know that because when they explain it to me, how do I learn Japanese, they give me an introduction and say, it's immersion, bro. CI immersion. That's the key. Okay, can you explain to me the methods, the details, and how did you put it into practice? What were your results of it? And how did you come to a conclusion and then refine it and do it again? Can you explain that to me? Because it might work for other people, like if a child tells another child, again, not like a 5-year-old telling a 5-year-old, an immature person mentally, low competence, basically, right? Not a bad or good thing, simply in that skill that they have, low competence. Tell another low competence person how to study and how to learn, it works. When you have a child talking to an adult, it doesn't work. And it is a double standard. The adult can choose to trust the advice of a child, not the other way around. It's rarely the other way around. An adult can choose to refuse a child. This usually is obligatory, because when a child refuses another child, instead what they're going to do is they're going to get into a shouting match. They're going to get into a shouting match about, like, well, I'm right, you're wrong. This is the best, that's the best. As opposed to having an adult talk with an adult. And again, about the maturity of the skill, they would discuss the pros and cons, compare and contrast, and then consolidate or negotiate. So like, I take a little from you, you take a little from me, maybe I'll take more from you, and then you understand that I'm still doing some of my stuff and incorporating your stuff. That's when you reach a higher level of comprehension about a skill you're having. So this is, I'm kind of revealing, sort of, in a very introductory way, how I gauge people's investments. So what is this serving me? This model that I'm using is serving me on how invested someone is. I typically use this to figure or try to gauge, like, is it important to this person, right? The higher, the more mature the skill becomes, the more willingly they're going to discuss it. And because of that, I usually think it's the most important thing. So I double down on these things. Whenever I meet a stranger and they talk about something and they show me levels of introduction, the methodology, talking about their organization, like how do they approach it and whatnot, and then they tell me examples of what they have done, then this is a very, very important and maturated skill of their life. So it is very likely going to be something that must be very important and habitual. So when I'm interacting with this person, I make sure that I am more able to connect with those things. And that's where I use my conversational skills for. I double down on the thing that checks all these boxes. However, when someone says, yeah, I think these games are good, I'm not going to pay as much attention to that. Largely because the investment's not there. Like if they just say, oh, this game is good, and not say anything else, when I ask a question, when someone says, oh, this game is the best, hey, can you explain to me what are some qualities of why this game's the best? If they are unable to explain anything like that, it kind of tells me where they are. Like they haven't done it long enough to even maybe have the chance of thinking about it deeply. So really fairly useful technique, at least how I'm doing it. And I would leverage this because then if that person ever asked me for help, right? If someone ever asked me for help, I would contextualize, much like Bunpro can, if they want, I would contextualize in their matured skill. So if someone really loves sports and they start talking about sports and stuff, most of my analogies and my applications for conversion of comprehension would be in sports. Or maybe even disc golf or whatever they bring up. Most of my analogies, metaphors, similes, and if I'm deficient, it's an opportunity to learn. So if someone really likes novels, I will ask them, what type of novels do you like? And then I would read some of those novels to understand the person, because the person explained a lot to me. And then whenever if they need help, not everyone needs help, they just want to share, right? Or connect or understand something, I can be very helpful if I can contextualize everything and associate it with their memory. This is what produces, in my opinion, it is necessary to produce comprehension. You know, the thing that most people say, like, oh, I understand you now. Or someone else would say to me, like, it always seems like I have no problems listening to you. And also, even though the things you're saying are really complicated, for whatever reason, the way you explain it, I can understand it. That's what this is. So I spend most of my time doing this, if I can. Obviously, I still have to sleep and eat, all that stuff. So anyways, I just thought I'd share why I'm doing Bunpro. Like, for example, why am I spending more time ranting during topics than I would when I'm doing SRS and like trying to memorize in the beginning? It's because I was a child. I was immature. Like, I haven't matured enough yet to say these things. Now I can talk about Japanese and my experiences. It's been 2.5 years, so over several thousands of hours. So, and if you're doing this, whatever I was describing earlier, for thousands of hours, you are likely to have endless, certainly enough to fill a 4-hour session. I mean, it's already brutal enough for people to expect that you summarize like 6,000 hours of things in 15 minutes. I can most certainly try to do it in a couple hours. That most of these statements I'm more or less building for day 200. I've become a lot more retrospective and hand wavy and generalizing when I'm getting ready to prepare for a review again. So day 200 is going to be a big day. All right, folks, that's a wrap for Bunpro today. If you're going to watch this later, arigatou gozaimasu. As always, feel free to follow along, pick up Bunpro for yourself. You're always welcome to come on by and yap, discuss, share a story with me. I love collecting stories. That is the intended purpose of sharing my experience, along with monologuing and categorizing my current thoughts, because in the future I might look back and think about how much I have matured, right? Or maybe how much I became immature. Who knows? We'll find out. Until next time, 皆さんまたね。見てくれてありがとう. Thanks for watching. I will see you guys on the next one. I'm gonna get up, take a quick bathroom break, and I'll be back with Hanzahiro. Thank you. What do you mean right on time? I got Hanzahiro to do.